It's Paul Marsh here on Express, and I am delighted to say that I am joined by Paul Marsh. Paul, how are
The,
you?
the Irish version. I'm great. Good to talk to you. It's always great to meet another Paul Marsh.
It's so strange. Do you know what the really strange thing is? So there's actually a Paul Marsh who's literally lives where I live and was in the year above me at school, and I think he's an artist or a painter or something like that.
I was going to ask you if he was an auctioneer because I Googled loads of Paul Marshes. I was working last night. If I looked to Sheffield, it's because I was on an ambulance for 15 hours last night. So
Oh,
I'm just out of bed. So but when you're on an ambulance, you bring people into hospital and you're kind of there's a lot of waiting around. So last night I was Googling Paul Marshes in the world. And if you go onto it, it looks like every Paul Marsh in the UK, apart from yourself, is an auctioneer or is an estate agent. And if you want to feel bad about it, just go Google Paul Marshes in America, and there's like their CEOs and their everything. We're literally the only two Paul Marshes I think that don't wear a suit to work.
oh, really?
Yeah, there's one guy has his name on a building.
Oh,
I Google and there's a picture, and it's Paul Marsh, and I'm thinking, at no point is anyone going to think, do you know Paul Marsh? Oh, the Irish guy who tells one-liner jokes. No, I mean the guy with his name on the building. You know
yeah.
what I mean? That's just
If ever you thought you were doing well in your life, and then you
yeah.
take a look at that, you go, oh, maybe not. Maybe I've still got a way to go.
Yeah, I years ago when I was doing I started doing comedy about 12 years ago, and I got a festival in Ireland, and they always rather than put a bio, they put it like a sound bite after you, kind of like I have one like the king of the one-liners or
Yeah.
whatever, and comedians are renowned for this that they will go and Google themselves and go through newspapers for something that stands out, and there's been loads of cases where a comedian, some newspaper might have said something like, this guy thinks he's a great comedian, but he's absolutely terrible. And they will just take great comedian. And that's the so
Oh,
I was looking for one of those. That was the first time I ever Googled my name. And then I saw the picture of the guy with his so not only did any comedy club say anything good about me, but there was also a Paul Marsh in the world who had his name on a building, and I thought, no,
so
I'm not doing as well.
I'll tell our listeners how this came about because so I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with Justin from the vaccines, and I also
Right.
interviewed him around about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. So I was on
Yeah,
YouTube Googling YouTubing myself trying to find this interview, and Paul Marsh comedian came up, and I thought,
yeah.
what's this? So I had a little look and you popped up telling all your jokes on stage. Absolutely brilliant. And I just, something
Thanks.
in my head just sort of struck a light bulb moment. I just thought, how brilliant for no other reason than to talk about our name, to have a chat with this guy, because obviously Paul Marsh is a very common, bland name to, there are probably thousands of Paul Marshes around the world. But like you say, you
Yeah.
kind of think about what these other Paul Marshes do.
You see, it is common. When I started Googling it, it is common in the UK, but I've never met another Paul Marsh in Ireland.
Oh,
It's not,
really?
yeah. I come from a place called Tipperary. My parents told me that they had a phone back in the 80s. We had the local shop, and we were the only Marshes in the phone book. So never mind your
Really?
Paul. Yeah, and
Wow.
they got rid of the phone because everyone used to say, "Do you mind if I use your phone for a minute?" And their bills were sky high. So they got rid of it and got it back in the 90s, and then there was something like 200 Marshes. So we're probably related. You never know.
Somewhere way, 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 way down the line, yeah.
Yeah,
So before we actually sort of talk about you and what you do, I want to talk about the
yeah,
name. Like I say, I think of Paul Marsh as a Jim Smith, a Steve Jones. It's a very bland English, boring name. Do you ever feel
yeah,
that the name has held you back at all? Like you say, you're a comedian, so you are working in the showbiz and entertainment
yeah.
world. Do you ever feel like the name Paul Marsh has held you back?
No, as I say, it's not that common here. I was actually sometimes when people do comedy, they change their name. And I remember an ex-girlfriend of mine, her friend saying, "Oh, that's a cool name, Paul Marsh." And I remember thinking, "Okay, I'll keep it, so I won't change my name." Uh, but when I got into comedy, Frankie Boyle, he was huge years. He still is, but back when he kind of blew up, everyone was reading his autobiography, and he wrote a lot about his best friend growing up, who was Paul Marsh. So
Oh,
anytime I went over to Scotland or England to do a gig, I would say I'd be in a green room with comedians, and I'd say I'm Paul Marsh, and they go, "Are you Frankie's mate?" And I'm like, "No, I've met him once, but that's it.
Mate, yeah, I met him once. I don't think we'd consider ourselves mates. Certainly not enough
Yeah,
to be in his autobiography.
but yeah, no, I never thought about it until when you got in touch. I have to say I was delighted because I'm 51 now, and the whole Instagram and YouTube thing. I've only started doing that a while. So if someone like yourself is coming across my YouTube, I must be doing something right. So
There you go.
that's good to
Exactly.
hear.
You must be.
Yeah.
It's good. It's perfect. Were you named after anyone or anything like that?
No, my parents were just really when it came to naming us, we're like I have a John, a brother John, a sister Mary. They weren't very,
Quite
uh
traditional names.
yeah. So I do a whole thing in my set about names because I'm kind of obsessed because there was 7 Pauls in my class. You probably got that as well.
Uh,
And
no, actually, in my class and year and what have you, no, I don't think there are any other Pauls, which is
there
very
was
unusual.
there was 6 in the first school, and then when I went to secondary school there was 7. And I always felt gutted because another guy got the nickname Tall Paul,
Right.
even though I was taller than him, but he was skinny and he looked taller. And I
Ah,
just thought,
okay.
yeah. But
So
yeah, there's
speaking of nicknames, then, well, before we get to nicknames, I just wanted to tell you sort of how I got my name, really.
yeah.
And it's sort of pure luck because I was almost Rodney.
You were going to be called Rodney.
I was going to be called Rodney
Yeah,
Marsh.
yeah.
My
One of
dad,
my schools.
my dad's a
Sorry.
massive, massive Man City fan,
Yeah,
and obviously with the surname of Marsh, was begging my mum to be called Rodney. And of course, so I was born in '81, so this is pre Only Fools and Horses. So
yeah,
yeah, I think literally up until about 8 months or something like that, I was going to be a Rodney, and then it was literally the last minute that my mum, thank God, won and
yeah.
called me Paul rather than Rodney.
Because an old school teacher of mine used to call me Rodney, and I had no idea why he called me Rodney, and he was a Man City fan. I had no. Yes,
There you go.
but the Swampy as well. That's the funny. I think I said it to you on a
Yeah.
text message there. That was me. I got that nickname as well. I think it's just something that goes
The
with
Swampy Marsh,
Marsh.
yeah. So I got the nickname Swampy because through school I didn't have that. Through school I was just Marshy. And then when
Yeah,
I started playing football for down here, the Portsmouth Royal Navy, I was never in the Navy, but they allowed a certain amount of civilians to play. So I ended
yeah,
up playing for the Portsmouth Royal Navy. And because of the Navy, yeah, I got called Swampy a lot, and it kind of it stuck really, and it stuck with me all the way through. But the other nickname that I got called, and it was only from my auntie, and I don't know if you ever had this. She called me Paulus.
no, I don't. No,
No,
I never got that.
so Paulus
Uh,
is Roman for small.
all right.
Yeah, which is as
Well,
a man, which is something you really want a nickname for, right?
yeah. Well, I'm 6'4", so I'm not going to get that one.
You're
But the
definitely
other
not
one,
going to get Paulus. No.
the other one that comes to mind is methane is marsh gas. So that was another
Oh,
one.
really? Oh, no, I've never heard of that
Yeah.
one.
So yeah, you were either called marsh gas or CH4 or something like that. That was always so I had a joke about that. Sorry to be rude now, but when I break wind, I'm literally in my element. You know?
I think if you're going to nickname somebody CH4, you've really got to commit to that, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So tell us about you. Tell us about your life. So not only, I mean, you've mentioned your comedy. So not only are you a
Yeah,
comedian, you are a firefighter, you're a paramedic, you are a writer, and you're a family man as well.
yeah. I am. I'm from a place called Tipperary, and I moved to Dublin to join the fire brigade. I just always wanted to be a firefighter, but I always had a passion for doing comedy. For telling jokes and stuff like that. I think I did a school concert when I was 11, and I started it when I moved to Dublin when I was about 19 or 20. But the comedy scene wasn't that big as so I kind of shelved it for 20 years. And if there's anyone out there who's thinking has a kind of a thing that they're thinking that I never got around to it. I only got into comedy when I was 39. My now wife kind of convinced me I should do it. So and I won this big competition within, I think I was only 6 months doing comedy, which kind of moved me ahead. And then I
Wow.
started getting gigs but it's kind of like an addiction. I wouldn't say it's a second job as such, more as I just I'm kind of thinking about retirement now, but I have no problem retiring from the fire brigade, but I couldn't dream of retiring from comedy I'm not doing
Yeah.
this, you know.
That
It's
buzz of standing up on stage, and when
yeah,
something lands and the audience erupts, it's the buzz, isn't it? The adrenaline.
yeah, and it's funny in the fire brigade that we have a thing called dynamic risk assessment. So if you imagine you're going to a fire and you make a plan and the plan might change and you're constantly reassessing it and you have to this is all written down on paper. That's how the fire brigade works. But that's literally what comedy is.
Mm.
So you're doing the same thing, you know. It's such a buzz to be up on stage for 20 minutes or 25 minutes. Plus the fact that as I've got older now, I've kind of I've changed. You're a dad as well, aren't you?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I have I attribute my change of style of comedy to my little guy. He's 8. I think when you become a dad and you have this little person that you want to get them to laugh, and you embrace the silliness again. Because somewhere in your 20s, I think it's kind of knocked out of you. You become mature and you
Yeah.
tell a silly joke and your friend goes, oh, just, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And that slowly gets knocked out of you. And it comes back when you're a dad. So I a lot of the clubs I play to, when I'm playing to an older audience, the fellas like myself, you know, that will that I know our parents or whatever, and I find I can go sillier, and
Yeah.
I've embraced that. So I've actually done shows now where it's just, you know, more dad jokes and more silliness. And yeah,
So the
so
funny thing about all of that, and like it's kind of really weird how the world works. So 2 points I want to make. One, I used to have a feature on the show where I did a dad joke every single day.
oh,
So
brilliant!
that's a funny one. But the other funny thing is when I was 18, I actually tried out to be a firefighter myself. Um,
No way.
Yeah, tried out to be a firefighter, passed all of the physical side, and then obviously, I mean, I'm going back a few years now, but you used to have to sit down and do your English and maths test and what have you. And
Yeah,
I failed on the maths test by 1 point. So that's not even so it would have been like 3 points for a correct answer. So it wouldn't have even
yeah.
been a whole answer, half an answer or whatever it was. And I failed on 1 point, and that's why I didn't get
No
into the
way.
service.
And come here. There's one more parallel between us because when I said I shelved it when I was 19 or 20, I became a DJ. Now I was never on the radio, but I must have played thousands of gigs, you know, 21st and weddings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I was a DJ for years as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
definitely
So
parallels between the two of us.
there is. So I worked in a bar when I was about 23 and I became a DJ that way. And the DJing at around about 25, 26 led me to radio. So I was on the
Yeah,
radio for about 4 or 5 years here at Express. Then I got married, had kids, and kind of left radio behind for a little bit. And it's literally
yeah,
been the last 18 months that I actually have, like, there's been a change in family situation, and I've come back
yeah,
onto the radio. So, like you say, it's really, you talk about coming back to comedy later in life. I've done the
yeah.
exact same thing with radio. At the age of 40, 41, I came back to radio.
It's if my job is anything to we can retire from my job at 55. And to a lot of people, you know, when you're like 20, you think 55 is so old. The amount of guys that have left my job and started doing something that they were passionate about all their life. It's never too late to do it. You know, I've got some of our guys are celebrated artists and stuff like that because they just took up painting or got back to painting or, you know, stuff like that. So it's, if anything, if there's anyone listening that has ever thought about doing comedy, it's so easy to do nowadays, or anything at all, DJing, whatever. It's you're never too old. Uh,
It's
Definitely
funny you
go for
should
it.
say that. I'm friends with a fella called Paul Barton, who I know through my dad and through football and everything else like that. And again,
Yeah,
he's originally from Liverpool. He was in the Navy, which is why he's down here. And again, he's one of these guys that was just always naturally funny. And then
yeah,
one day, like literally about a year ago, we noticed he was posting gigs, and we were like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm
yeah,
doing stand-up comedy." So, and again, he's around about 50 years old. So he got to that stage
yeah.
in life where he thought, I'm going to give it a go.
Because it's so, as I say, when I did it when I was 19, there was just comedy clubs, and what they did is they put you in the middle of good acts, we'll say, you know, acts that are around a while. So it's so tough. It was such a tough thing to do. But what they have now is, and I mean, they have it a long time. They have open mics,
Yes.
and some people are just happy to just do open mics every now and again and get their fix, you know. But the open mics basically is everyone on stage is the same as yourself. They're starting out, and everyone in the audience is friends of the people who are on the stage. So it's just the most friendliest atmosphere to do comedy in. You can't go wrong. You know what I mean? And they're brilliant. And I run one and I MC one here in Dublin, and it's always a great night. It's only when you move up the levels that it becomes serious, where people are going, "Oh, this is not funny" or whatever. But
Yeah.
those nights are always just, a laugh, and funnily enough, people will then try stuff that they just maybe shouldn't be normally in a comedy club, and then all of a sudden it works, and you learn
Yeah.
more from those nights than you do from any other nights.
Let me ask
Uh,
you about hecklers, because I obviously I've interviewed a
yeah,
few comedians recently, and
yeah,
I interviewed I can't think who it was off the top of my head, but I interviewed somebody and I said, "How do you deal with hecklers?" And he said, "Well,
yeah,
hecklers are just not really a big part of my show. I just don't seem to get a lot of hecklers." And I went, "You haven't been to
yeah.
Portsmouth yet. There's something about Portsmouth where we think it's audience participation. We like to get involved as well." And sure enough, I
Yeah.
went to the show that evening, and there was a fair bit of heckling. So is this something that you ever have to deal with? Because I would imagine Irish heckling is probably some of the best.
Certain clubs, you do. I find that the only heckles I ever get is if I talk about certain areas or something, and someone's from that area, they'll get very, and they'll have a go at me or whatever. Because I'm living in Dublin, but I'm from outside of Dublin, and I talk a lot about that. So then, if I slag off something about Dublin, someone, you'll get heckles. But to be honest with you, I'll let you into a little secret here. We have, in the back of our heads, loads of put down lines already lined up. When you see Jimmy Carr and all that, he's like, he didn't come up with that in the spot. He was ready. So I have one for every occasion. Well, I think anyway. So yeah, but it's not something that I enjoy. I don't. But sometimes you can get hecklers who are good fun, and they're just there like that. They're with friends, and some people just can't sit still at a comedy. They have to get involved. And those kind of people I do like, because you can get information off them, or they end up saying something that just can make the night.
Well, sometimes it ends up shaping the rest of your show, doesn't it?
It does, and then everyone that will come on from then on will kind of add to it, and the other acts, or if you're
Yeah.
MCing and you get so for the whole night long they're putting someone down. The first time back after COVID, we did a gig in a huge big tent, and everyone was sitting on, because we had social distancing still, and everyone was sitting on these kind of park bench type things, uh, picnic benches, those. So it's like four people in each of them or whatever. And earlier on in the show, this guy shouted something out, and the MC went to town on him. And then I was the first act on, and I went to town on him. And afterwards, we were just thinking that poor guy was locked up for 2 years on his first night out. And it was the fact that he was sitting with four women. It was him and four women, and he heckled and said something, and I think he'll never open his mouth in a comedy gig again.
Oh no! I always think you got to be a brave man to do that. Paul,
Yeah.
it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. I feel that
Thanks,
we
man.
could possibly do this again in the future. Maybe try and invite another Paul Marsh along, possibly not one of the
Yeah.
rich billionaires or anything else like that. If people want to find out a little bit more about you, where can they do that?
Luckily enough, I was able to get Paul Marsh comedian on everything. So I'm officially, I think, the only Paul Marsh that's a comedian. Anyway, so you'll get you'll get me on. I'm on TikTok as well, for not bad for a 51-year-old. So yeah, I'm on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, as you say. So check me out, and hopefully if you like silly jokes, you'll like my stuff.
Paul, thank you so much for talking to me. And like I say, we'll have to do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me. Cheers, Paul.